The child's cries echoed through the house, high-pitched and desperate, sending a chill through the mother's spine. She rushed into the living room, her heart racing. There, her little one stood, pointing at the trash can in the corner, tears streaming down their face. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, crouching down beside the child. But the child only shook their head, sobbing uncontrollably, their fingers still aimed directly at the trash can as though it held the very answers to their deepest fears. The mother's heart thudded in her chest as she tried to calm the child. "It's just a trash can, darling. There's nothing there." But the child's frantic gestures didn't stop. They refused to let go of their tight grip on her sleeve, as though clinging to her for dear life. Her mind raced. What could possibly be in that trash can that had caused her child such panic? Could it be something dangerous, something they'd thrown away and forgotten? She had no answers, just the sudden, overwhelming sensation that something was terribly wrong. Without thinking, she stood up and moved toward the trash can, her feet heavy with dread. Each step felt like it carried the weight of the world. She could feel her breath quicken as she reached for the lid, the child's sobs growing louder behind her. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it, unsure of what she might find. What she saw inside took her breath away. There was nothing extraordinary, just the usual mix of discarded food wrappers, empty cans, and old newspapers. But nestled in the center of it all, barely visible beneath the layers, was a small, tattered object that made her blood run cold. It was a piece of fabric, a bright color that caught her eye, unmistakable in its appearance. A child's toy. The very one her daughter had lost months ago, the one she had searched high and low for, believing it had simply vanished. Her heart stopped in her chest. How did it end up here, buried in the trash? And why had her child been so desperate to point it out? The child's sobs now quieted to soft whimpers, but their eyes were wide with fear, their tiny hands still gripping the mother's sleeve, unwilling to let go. The mother felt a knot tighten in her stomach. There was more to this. More than just a forgotten toy. Something was deeply wrong. As the mother stared at the toy, memories of the past few days began to flood her mind. The child had been acting strangely, unsettled, anxious, waking up in the middle of the night, eyes wide open with fear. It had started with tiny things, like avoiding certain rooms in the house, refusing to go near the hallway, and clinging to her more than usual. But this was different. The fear in her child's eyes wasn't the kind that could be brushed away with comfort. Something was deeply unsettling. She knelt down again, her hand trembling as she held the toy in her palm. It was worn, frayed. Clearly having been through far more than a typical stuffed animal ever should. A sudden thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. Could the child have seen something that had caused them to react this way? The toy, the trash, the child's fear, none of it made sense. But there was no mistaking the terror that had gripped her little one's heart. Her mind raced as she turned to look at her child, whose eyes were wide with fear, their small body trembling. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What did you see? What's wrong?" The child's lips quivered as they pointed once more at the trash can, their voice barely audible. "It was in there," they said, their eyes filling with unspeakable fear. "It was inside." The words hung in the air like a haunting echo. The mother's pulse quickened. What was it? What was inside that trash can that had sent her child into such a state? And why had the child been so certain, so insistent, that it had been there all along? For the first time, the mother felt a deep, primal fear settle in her bones. Something far more troubling than she could have imagined was about to unfold, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. But she had no choice. For the sake of her child, she had to understand the truth. The mother sat down on the living room couch, the toy still gripped in her hand, its frayed edges now an ominous reminder of the mystery her child had just uncovered. She glanced at the trash can once more, half expecting it to reveal a new secret, something more, but the lid remained as mundane as it had ever been. She glanced at her child, still standing frozen by her side, their gaze fixed on the can. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, uncertainty, and fear. What had just happened? Why had her child reacted so dramatically? This wasn't just about a lost toy, it couldn't be. She had seen this kind of fear before, but not from her child, not like this. There had to be more to it. "Sweetheart," she whispered again, her voice gentle, but the anxiety in her chest made it tremble. "Please, tell me. What did you see?" Her child didn't respond at first. They just stared at the trash can, tears still welling up in their eyes. The fear was palpable, an invisible wall between them that neither could cross. She reached out, pulling her child close, wrapping them in her arms, hoping that the comfort of her embrace would somehow erase the fear from their tiny body. But her child remained stiff, eyes wide, looking over her shoulder at the trash can. It's in there," they murmured again, their voice shaking. The mother's heart tightened. The repetition of the child's words sent a shiver down her spine. The same words over and over, "It's in there." What did that mean? What was in the trash can? There was nothing in there that could explain this kind of fear. Or was there? She stood up, walking over to the trash can once again, but this time she was more cautious. Her hands shook as she reached for the lid. She lifted it slowly, as if expecting something to leap out at her. But the trash still looked the same: discarded wrappers, empty cans, a handful of forgotten newspapers. Nothing moved. Nothing leapt from the can. Yet the child's fear remained, thick and heavy in the air. She turned back to her child. "There's nothing here, sweetheart. Nothing's going to hurt you. Do you understand?" She smiled softly, though the smile felt hollow. She wasn't sure if she believed her own words anymore. But her child only shook their head, their small body trembling. "It was there, last night," they whispered, their eyes wide and glazed with fear. "I saw it, Mommy. I saw it. I heard it." The mother's stomach sank. "What did you hear? What did you see?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, the words catching in her throat. The child didn't answer immediately. Instead, they turned to face her, looking so small and fragile in that moment. "It was moving in the dark," they said, their voice barely a breath. "I saw its eyes. It was watching me." The mother's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of eyes? What do you mean?" She felt the panic rise in her chest. Was this a nightmare, some kind of hallucination? But how could it be? The child was terrified, visibly distressed. This wasn't just a bad dream. This felt real, so real. The child's voice cracked. "It was in the trash. It's hiding." They clung to her once more, their body shaking against her, as if they were trying to hide from something invisible. She stood there, at a loss. Her child had never been like this before. There were no monsters, no terrifying creatures hiding in the dark corners of their home. She was sure of it. But the child's fear was undeniable. The way they spoke, the way they reacted, it was as if they were seeing something she couldn't. She decided then that she couldn't just dismiss it. She had to understand what was going on, no matter how strange or unsettling the situation seemed. "All right, sweetheart," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm, even though her nerves were on edge. "Let's go check the room. I'll check the whole house if I have to. We'll see what's going on. But I need you to tell me what you saw, really saw, okay?" The child nodded, though their expression didn't change. "I saw it," they repeated, though this time the words lacked the intensity of the earlier cries. "It's there." The mother turned slowly, taking the child's hand in hers. They walked together toward the hallway, but the house felt different now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Her footsteps were heavy as they passed the rooms, the dark corners of the house seeming to stretch farther than they ever had before. She glanced nervously into the shadows, feeling like something was watching them, even though she couldn't see anything. They made it to the child's room. The child hesitated at the door, their small hand tightening around the mother's. "It's in there too," they said softly. The mother stepped inside, looking around. There was nothing in the room but a bed, toys scattered across the floor, and clothes piled on a chair. Everything appeared normal. Still, the air was thick with something unspoken, something that made her skin crawl. "Sweetheart, I don't see anything here," she said gently, trying to reassure both herself and the child. "There's nothing here to be afraid of." But even as she spoke, something in her gut told her that this wasn't just about a child's imagination. There was something deeper, something that couldn't be easily explained. And until she found out what it was, she would never be able to rest. The days following the strange encounter with the trash can were filled with uncertainty. The child, though a bit calmer, still couldn't shake the fear that had taken root in their heart. Every night, they would wake in the dark, eyes wide and searching, as if expecting to see something lurking just out of view. The mother tried her best to console them, but even her most reassuring words couldn't break the cloud of fear hanging over her child. It wasn't until the next evening, when they sat together on the couch, the child nestled against her side, that the mother began to piece together the puzzle. She had spent hours searching the house, inspecting every dark corner and every closet, convinced that something was hidden there, but she had found nothing. No toys misplaced, no hidden messages, no strange occurrences. Yet her child's behavior only grew more peculiar as the days passed. Sitting on the couch, the mother took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past press down on her. She had always tried to protect her child from the hardships of life, but some things couldn't be shielded. As much as she wanted to keep her child safe from the darker parts of their world, she knew that the truth, no matter how painful, had a way of catching up to you. "Sweetheart," the mother began softly, brushing a lock of hair from the child's forehead, "is there something you're not telling me? Something that's been bothering you?" The child, looking down at their lap, fidgeted with their hands. They didn't answer at first, and the silence stretched between them. The mother's heart ached for the little one. What had happened to make them so scared, so lost in their own fear? She couldn't stop the feeling that something in the past had triggered this, a deep, unsettling feeling she couldn't ignore. Then, the child spoke, their voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be scared anymore. I just want it to stop." The mother felt her breath catch in her throat. She knew her child, and she knew that there was more to this fear than just imagination. There was something buried beneath it all, something that needed to be understood. "Tell me, sweetheart. What's been happening?" she asked gently, her voice full of concern. "What's been making you so afraid?" The child hesitated, their small fingers twining together as they stared at the floor. The mother waited, giving them the space they needed. Finally, the child spoke, the words coming out in a rush, as though they had been holding them back for far too long. "It was, when we moved," the child said, their voice trembling. "When we came here. I didn't want to leave, Mommy. I didn't want to move away from him." The mother froze. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Him. Her mind raced back to the past, to a time before they had settled into this house, before the new beginning. Her child's father. He had been a part of their lives until the sudden breakup. The separation had been hard on everyone, especially the child. The mother had tried to shield her from the tension, the pain of it all, but it seemed that the child had absorbed far more of it than she had realized. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry," the mother whispered, her heart breaking for her child. "I didn't know you were still upset about leaving. But we're safe now. I promise you, we're safe." But the child shook their head, tears welling in their eyes. "It wasn't just that, Mommy. It's what he did before we left. It's what I saw. The words felt like a weight in the air. The mother's stomach twisted. What did the child see? What could possibly explain the terror they felt? The child wiped their eyes, continuing through their sobs. I saw him take something. Something shiny. I didn't know what it was, but he took it from the room. I didn't want to tell you, but I saw it, and I've been scared ever since. The mother's mind went back to the breakup. The father had been distant, angry. There were fights, words that stung, and an atmosphere so thick with tension that it was hard to breathe. She had tried to keep things calm for the child, tried to shield them from the worst of it. But now, as she listened to her child speak, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't done enough. She hadn't seen the signs. And now, it was coming back to haunt them. What did he take, darling? The mother asked, her voice tight with concern. The child looked up at her, eyes wide with fear. It was a piece of paper. A letter. I don't know what was on it, but he kept it in his pocket. And after that, everything got bad. The mother's heart skipped a beat. A letter? What kind of letter? Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of it all. There was so much she didn't know, so much that had been hidden from her. The child's fear, the mysterious toy, the terror in their eyes, it all seemed connected to something far deeper than she had realized. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll figure this out. We'll get through this together. Just tell me what else you remember. The child hesitated, then whispered, I remember the trash can. I remember seeing him throw something in there. After that, I couldn't sleep. And I think it's still in there. The weight of the moment hit the mother like a wave. The past, the broken pieces of their lives, were now spilling into the present, and they had to confront it. The toy, the trash can, and the fear, it all connected to something she hadn't seen coming. And now, the truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. The days following their conversation were filled with a sense of urgency. The mother's mind couldn't rest, constantly swirling with questions that had no answers. She tried to push aside the unease that lingered, the creeping feeling that there was more to her child's fear than she could comprehend. What had the father taken? What had been in that letter? Why had he thrown it into the trash? These questions weighed heavily on her heart, yet every time she tried to seek out the answers, she felt like she was hitting a wall. The child, though a little calmer, still couldn't shake the haunting images that had plagued their thoughts. Each night, they would wake up with a start, their eyes wide with fear, looking around the room as though expecting something to jump out at them. The mother would rush to comfort them, offering words of reassurance, but nothing seemed to help. Her child's fear was too deep, too real, and it gripped her with a sense of helplessness she hadn't felt in years. The mother tried everything she could think of, taking the child out for walks, baking cookies, even attempting to make the house feel less ominous by adding new decorations to brighten the rooms. But no matter what she did, the child's unease lingered, and the mystery surrounding the trash can remained unresolved. One afternoon, as the child napped in their room, the mother sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of papers in front of her. She had gone through the old bills, the files, everything she could think of that might offer a clue. But still, there was no letter, no sign of the missing document the child had described. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. Her thoughts drifted back to the trash can. The mother had cleaned it out several times since the initial incident, hoping that whatever had been causing her child's terror would simply fade away. Yet, every time she approached the can, a chill ran down her spine. It felt wrong, as if something still lingered there, waiting to be discovered. In her desperation, she called a family friend who had always been a steady source of support. Ruth, an older woman who had known the family for years, was always a calm presence during times of trouble. Perhaps she could offer some clarity. "Ruth, I don't know what to do," the mother said, her voice tight with emotion. There's something wrong. My child is terrified, and I can't figure out why. They keep pointing to the trash can, and they won't tell me what's in it, but I know it's not just a toy they're afraid of. Ruth's voice on the other end of the phone was steady but concerned. What do you think is in there? She asked. I don't know, the mother replied, her frustration rising. I've looked, Ruth. I've looked in the trash more times than I can count, but there's nothing there. I don't understand it. The child keeps talking about something they saw, something that happened before we moved. But I can't make sense of it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ruth had known the mother and her child for years, and she had seen the family go through their share of struggles. You've been through a lot, dear, Ruth said softly. But sometimes, the answers are harder to find than we expect. It sounds like your child is holding on to something they haven't been able to let go of. Perhaps it's not just about what's in the trash, but about what's been left unsaid. The words hung in the air between them. The mother closed her eyes, trying to digest what Ruth had said. What had been left unsaid? What had her child seen, and why had it shaken them so deeply? I think, Ruth continued, her voice gentle, sometimes our minds latch onto things, even things we don't understand, because they represent something we can't yet process. You might have to dig deeper into the past to understand why your child is so afraid. The mother's heart sank as she realized that Ruth was right. The fear wasn't just about the toy or the trash can. It wasn't even about the broken family or the move. There was something darker, something hidden beneath the surface, waiting for them to confront it. Thank you, Ruth, the mother said, her voice trembling. I think I know what I need to do. As the conversation ended, the mother felt a shift inside her. For the first time, she knew what she had to do. The truth lay in confronting the past, unearthing the secrets that had been buried for so long. She had to face what her child had seen, no matter how painful or difficult it might be. Later that evening, after the child had gone to bed, the mother went to the trash can once again. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid, her mind racing with the possibilities. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she had to find it. As she dug through the trash, she felt a wave of unease wash over her. She reached deeper, sifting through the layers, hoping to uncover something, anything, that would explain her child's fear. And then, beneath a pile of discarded wrappers, she felt something cold and smooth, tucked away in the corner. Her heart skipped a beat as she pulled it out, a small piece of paper, worn and creased. She stared at it for a moment, breathless. This was it. This was the letter her child had described. She unfolded it carefully, the paper crackling in her hands. The words were faded, but still legible. As she read, her eyes widened in shock. This wasn't just any letter, it was a letter that held the key to everything. The truth was finally here. The mother sat on the kitchen floor, the crumpled piece of paper in her hand, her fingers trembling as she tried to make sense of the faded words. She had been expecting something, a note, an explanation, a clue to what had been haunting her child for weeks. But the letter in her hands wasn't just a piece of paper. It was something far more significant than she could have imagined. She squinted at the writing, the letters barely visible in the dim light of the kitchen. The paper had clearly been folded and unfolded countless times, its edges worn and torn. Her heart raced as she deciphered the first few words. Do not tell her. It's safer if she never knows. The words struck her like a cold slap to the face. What was this? Who had written it? And why was it so important that it was kept hidden from her? Her thoughts spun, but she forced herself to read on, determined to understand. The letter continued, filled with strange phrases and cryptic instructions. As she read, a sickening realization began to form in her mind. The letter wasn't just a note, it was a warning. A warning that had been kept hidden from her, from the child. And the more she read, the more she began to understand. You must destroy it before she remembers. It can never be allowed to resurface. The mother's blood ran cold. She had heard enough. The child's fear, the strange behavior, the endless tears, they had all been connected to this letter. To whatever it was warning about. Her mind flashed back to the child's words, "It's in the trash." Her heart clenched in her chest. There was something deeply troubling about this letter, and it had to be connected to the toy, the very same toy that had been thrown into the trash, the one the child had been so terrified of. But why? Why was it so important to keep the child from remembering? The answers were right in front of her, yet they felt just out of reach. She had to know more. The child's fear couldn't be dismissed as mere imagination anymore. This was real, and whatever had been hidden away in their past was now coming to light. The mother stood up, her legs shaking as she walked over to the living room, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. The child was still sleeping in their room, oblivious to the storm that was brewing in the house. She couldn't face the child just yet. Not until she had answers. Not until she could understand what had been hidden from them all these years. She sat down on the couch, taking a deep breath. Her thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear, the letter wasn't just about the toy. It was about something far darker, something that had been deliberately hidden from her. She needed to find out more, to uncover the full truth. Her mind raced back to the child's father. Had he known about this? Was this letter connected to him? The relationship between them had ended in turmoil, with unresolved tensions and unspoken words. But had he known something? Had he been hiding something from her, too? Could this letter be a clue to a deeper, more painful secret? She couldn't sit idly by anymore. The truth was out there, and she had to find it. She had to protect her child from whatever this was, no matter the cost. The mother stood up, determination settling into her bones. She had to confront her past, confront the things that had been swept under the rug. But how? Where would she even begin? She started with the one place that felt the most obvious, the home she had shared with the child's father. It had been months since they moved out, and she had avoided returning to the old house. The memories there were too painful, too fresh. But now, as she held the letter in her hands, she knew she had to go back. With resolve in her heart, the mother grabbed her keys and rushed out the door, the letter still clutched in her hand. The drive felt endless, the familiar streets of their old neighborhood both comforting and unsettling. She didn't know what she would find when she reached the old house. But she knew she couldn't move forward without answers. She had to uncover the truth, for herself, and for her child. As she pulled into the driveway, the house loomed before her, a place once filled with love, now marred by the echoes of the past. She hesitated for a moment, but then, without another thought, she walked to the front door and let herself in. The door creaked as it opened, and she stepped inside, feeling the weight of every memory that had been left behind. The house felt different now, empty, cold. The silence was deafening. She wandered through the rooms, searching for anything that could give her a clue, but everything seemed ordinary. Nothing stood out, except for the faint sense of dread that seemed to linger in the air. And then, in the corner of the bedroom, something caught her eye. It was a small, locked drawer in the bedside table. She hadn't seen it before, but somehow, she knew it held something important. Her hand shook as she reached for the key in her pocket. It was the key she had taken from the child's father when they moved out. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, it felt like the key to unraveling everything. She turned the key in the drawer and opened it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, there was a small box, dust-covered and forgotten. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it out, opening it to reveal its contents. And there, lying at the bottom of the box, was the same letter. But this time, it wasn't faded. This time, it was clearer than ever before. The letter was meant for her. The letter lay before her, crisp and unmarked, as though it had been carefully preserved for just this moment. The mother's fingers trembled as she slowly unfolded it. The words were clearer now, sharper in their meaning. She had found what she was searching for, but the truth felt like a heavy burden she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. The letter seemed to be written in haste, the ink smudged in places, as if the writer had been pressed for time. The words on the page were haunting, laden with secrecy and fear. As she read, her mind spun, piecing together memories from the past, the things she had ignored or tried to forget. You have to protect her. She must never know what happened. If she remembers, everything will be ruined. It will be your fault. Her heart skipped a beat. Who had written this? And why was it directed at her? The more she read, the more she began to understand the terrifying reality behind the cryptic messages. The letter went on, speaking of things she couldn't quite comprehend, events she had either blocked from her memory or never knew about at all. Words like danger, hidden, and locked away seemed to appear over and over. And then there was the final line, the one that chilled her to the bone: the child must forget what she saw. You must destroy everything. The weight of those words was suffocating. Destroy everything? What could that possibly mean? What had her child seen, and why was it so dangerous for her to remember? The mother's mind raced, but the pieces were still scattered, out of reach. The mother's eyes lifted from the letter, her mind in turmoil. She had always known there was something deeper, something hidden in her relationship with the father of her child. Their breakup had been messy, filled with unspoken resentment and bitterness. But now, with this letter in her hands, it was clear that there were far darker reasons for their separation than she could have imagined. She had thought that leaving was the solution, that moving away from the tension and pain would allow them both a fresh start. But now, standing in the very room where they had once lived together, the memories came flooding back. The lies. The secrets. The coldness in the air whenever they had talked about the past. She had dismissed it, chalking it up to a failed relationship, to irreconcilable differences. But now, with the truth staring her in the face, she realized that there had been far more at play. The mother sank to her knees, the letter clutched tightly in her hands, her thoughts spinning out of control. What had her child witnessed? What had been hidden from her all these years? And why hadn't she seen the signs earlier? The silence in the room was deafening. It felt as though the walls themselves were closing in around her, urging her to confront the past she had long tried to forget. She couldn't escape it. Not anymore. Her mind flashed back to the child's father, to their final days together. He had been distant, withdrawn, as though he were hiding something. He had always been protective of their privacy, never wanting to talk about the things that made him uncomfortable. But there had been moments, small things that didn't make sense at the time. Things he had brushed off, swept under the rug. Now, everything was coming back to haunt her. She remembered how he would lock certain drawers, keep certain things hidden from view. And there had been whispers, murmurs from friends, from acquaintances, things she hadn't understood. Had he been trying to protect her? Or had he been hiding something far worse? The thought made her stomach turn. What if everything she had believed about their life together was a lie? What if the truth had been staring her in the face, hidden in plain sight, and she had missed it? Her thoughts turned back to the child. She couldn't ignore the fear in their eyes, the terror that had gripped their heart. Whatever they had seen, whatever had been hidden from them, was still with them. And she had to face it. For their sake. With a sense of determination rising within her, the mother stood up, the letter still in her hand. She couldn't let the fear rule her anymore. She couldn't let the past control their future. She had to find the answers, no matter how painful they might be. She turned to leave the room, the heavy weight of the letter still in her grasp. But then, as her eyes scanned the pages, she began to see a pattern. The writing wasn't just random, it was a code. A code that seemed to be linked to the letter. The symbols, the instructions, they all fit together. This was it. This was the key to understanding everything. The mother's heart raced as she read the final page, the last line echoing in her mind. Do not let her remember. Keep her safe. The key is hidden, and it must remain locked away forever. Her pulse quickened. The key. What key? What was hidden, and why had it been kept from her? She closed the book, her mind reeling. There was more to uncover, more to understand. The past was calling her, demanding that she face the truth. And now, there was no turning back. The answers were within reach, but the cost of finding them would be greater than she could ever have imagined. The mother stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of the truth pressing down on her, knowing that the moment she stepped forward, everything would change. The mother stood still, holding the leather-bound book in her hands, its weight now symbolizing not just the physical burden but the emotional one she had carried for far too long. The child nodded, their small face pressed against her chest, and for the first time in days, the mother felt a sense of peace. She had made a promise to herself to protect her child, but now, she realized that the most important thing she could do was to be honest, honest with herself, honest with her child. They had faced enough fear in silence. Now, they would face it together, with love and understanding. The mother looked at the letter once more. She could feel the presence of the past lingering, but it no longer had the power to control her. The truth, no matter how painful, had been set free. The secrets, the lies, and the fear that had haunted her child had been uncovered. And now, there was only room for healing. Everything you've seen, everything you've felt, it's real, the mother said gently. But we don't have to be afraid anymore. We can let go of the past. It doesn't control us anymore. We have the power to move forward, to create our own story. Her child looked up at her, their eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and hope. But what about the letter? The toy? The trash can? They asked quietly. The mother smiled softly, brushing a lock of hair from the child's forehead. All of those things were tied to the past, to things that no longer matter. We don't need to be afraid of them anymore. The letter was a warning, but now we know what it means. We can let go. The fear is gone. The child, still not fully understanding, nodded slowly. But the comfort of their mother's words began to settle into their heart. For the first time in a long time, they felt safe. They felt understood. The mother had given them the strength to let go of the fear that had taken root in their soul. Together, they sat in the quiet of the room, the weight of the past no longer a burden but a lesson they could now learn from. The mother knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey, one where the past would still linger, but it no longer held the power to define their future. As the evening sun filtered through the window, casting a soft golden light over the room, the mother took her child's hand. They had made it through the storm. They had uncovered the truth, faced the unknown, and emerged stronger on the other side. And in that moment, the mother realized the greatest lesson of all: the past may shape us, but it does not have to control us. The future was theirs to create, together, free from fear. The mother smiled down at her child, their faces bathed in the warm light of a new beginning. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep, unwavering sense of peace. The truth had set them free, and now, they could truly begin again.